Chapter 2. Self-care as sacred foundation. Self-care is not selfish indulgence but sacred maintenance, tending the garden of your soul, so beauty may continue blooming into a world that hungers for authentic sweetness. Sweet wisdom from within. There's a profound paradox at the heart of sweet souls. The very people most naturally inclined to care for others are often the least skilled at caring for themselves. If you've ever found yourself pouring endless energy into supporting friends, family, or colleagues, while your own well-being slowly erodes, you're not alone. This tendency isn't a character flaw or a sign of poor boundaries. It's often the result of deeply ingrained cultural messages that equate self-care with selfishness and service to others as the highest virtue. But what if we've been approaching this all wrong? What if self-care isn't the opposite of caring for others, but rather the essential foundation that makes sustainable care possible? What if tending to your own needs isn't selfish but sacred, not indulgent but necessary, not optional but fundamental to your capacity to offer authentic sweetness to the world? The garden metaphor reveals a profound truth. A gardener who never tends the soil, never waters the roots, never provides proper nutrients will eventually find that even the most beautiful plants begin to wither. Your sweetness, your capacity for warmth and compassion, your ability to create healing in the world. These are not inexhaustible resources that magically replenish themselves. They require conscious cultivation, intentional nourishment, and regular restoration. This chapter will guide you through understanding self-care not as an afterthought or luxury, but as the foundational practice upon which all other forms of growth and service rest. We'll explore how caring for yourself creates what researchers call virtuous cycles, positive patterns that build upon themselves, where self-care leads to increased energy, which enhances your capacity for sweetness, which improves your relationships, which motivates further self-care. Understanding self-care as virtuous cycle foundation. When researchers study the patterns that distinguish thriving individuals from those who burn out, they consistently find one crucial difference. Those who sustain their caring nature over time have learned to make self-care the root of all their other practices. This isn't selfishness disguised as wisdom. It's practical recognition of how human energy and resilience actually work. Consider the airline safety instruction that's become a powerful metaphor for self-care. In the event of an emergency, put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. This instruction isn't suggesting that your needs matter more than others. It's acknowledging that you cannot effectively help anyone if you're unconscious from lack of oxygen. The same principle applies to emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. For people with naturally sweet dispositions, this concept often triggers immediate resistance. You might find yourself thinking, but others need me, or I feel guilty focusing on myself when there's so much suffering in the world, or doesn't this go against everything I believe about service and love? These responses are understandable, even admirable in their concern for others, but they're based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how care actually works. The neuroscience of compassion reveals something remarkable. When your own basic needs are met, your brain's capacity for empathy and emotional regulation actually increases. When you're well-rested, properly nourished, and emotionally balanced, you're literally more capable of perceiving others' needs accurately and responding with wisdom rather than reactivity. Conversely, when you're depleted, stressed, or running on empty, your nervous system shifts into survival mode, reducing your capacity for the nuanced emotional intelligence that effective care requires. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion demonstrates that individuals who treat themselves with kindness are actually more emotionally available to others, not less. They experience what she calls compassion satisfaction, the positive feelings that come from helping others, rather than compassion fatigue, the exhaustion that results from giving beyond their capacity. This creates what we might call the primary virtuous cycle of sweet living. When you engage in genuine self-care, you increase your energy and emotional reserves. With greater energy, you have enhanced capacity for expressing authentic sweetness, patience when others are difficult, creativity in solving problems, presence when someone needs listening. This authentic sweetness leads to more positive interactions and relationships, which provide emotional nourishment and motivation to continue caring for yourself. The compound effect of this cycle is extraordinary. Small, consistent acts of self-care don't just maintain your current level of functioning, they actually increase your capacity over time. Like interest earning interest in a savings account, self-care practices build upon themselves, creating exponentially greater reserves of patience, compassion, and emotional intelligence. But why do sweet people struggle so much with this seemingly obvious principle? The answer lies in deep cultural conditioning that often begins in childhood. Many naturally caring individuals receive messages, sometimes explicit but often subtle, that their worth was tied to how much they gave to others. They might have been praised for being the helpful one or the one who never causes trouble, while their own needs were minimized or ignored. These messages created what psychologists call internalized oppression, the unconscious belief that your own needs are somehow less important than others. This belief can become so deeply ingrained that even thinking about self-care triggers guilt, shame, or anxiety. The voice in your head might say things like, "You're being selfish," "Others have it worse," or "You should be able to handle this without help." Recognizing this conditioning is the first step toward freedom. These messages, however well-intentioned, were based on a scarcity model of love, the false belief that care is a finite resource and that caring for yourself somehow takes away from what's available for others. In reality, love and care operate more like a well than a bucket. The more you draw from it mindfully and regularly, the more it replenishes and deepens. The locus of control principle becomes crucial here. You cannot control whether others approve of your self-care choices. You cannot control how quickly you see results from your efforts. You cannot control the cultural messages that surround you about selflessness and service. But you have complete control over your daily choices about how to treat yourself, what practices to implement, and how to talk to yourself about your own needs and worth. When you begin to recognize self-care as the foundation rather than the enemy of service, something shifts. Instead of seeing time spent on your own well-being as time stolen from others, you begin to see it as an investment in your capacity to love. Instead of viewing your needs as burdens, you begin to recognize them as important information that, when honored, enhances rather than diminishes your ability to show up fully for life. The foundation of self-care. Understanding your unique needs. Just as every garden requires different conditions to flourish, some plants needing full sun while others prefer shade, some requiring frequent watering while others thrive with minimal moisture, your individual self-care needs are as unique as your fingerprint. Understanding these needs with precision and compassion is the foundation upon which all effective self-care rests. The interconnection between physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being means that neglecting needs in any one area inevitably affects your capacity for sweetness in all areas. When you're physically depleted from poor sleep or inadequate nutrition, your emotional patience runs thin. When you're emotionally overwhelmed from absorbing others' distress without processing your own feelings, your mental clarity suffers. When you're mentally overstimulated from information overload, your spiritual connection feels distant. When you're spiritually disconnected from purpose and meaning, your physical energy wanes. For people with naturally sweet dispositions, this interconnection is often more pronounced. Your sensitivity, which allows you to attune to others' needs so skillfully, also makes you more susceptible to overwhelm when your own needs aren't met. Your empathy, which enables you to offer such meaningful support to others, can become a liability when you haven't developed equal skill at reading and responding to your own internal signals. Physical needs and your emotional demeanor. Your physical well-being forms the foundation of your emotional regulation and your capacity to express patience and kindness consistently. When your blood sugar is unstable, your patience becomes unstable. When you're chronically sleep-deprived, your emotional resilience plummets. When your body is tense from lack of movement or chronic stress, that tension can manifest as irritability or decreased tolerance for others' difficulties. Consider how your demeanor changes throughout the day as your physical needs fluctuate. Most people find they're more patient and emotionally available when they're well rested and nourished than when they're tired and hungry. This isn't a character flaw, it's basic human physiology. Your nervous system is designed to prioritize survival needs. And when those needs aren't met, less energy is available for the higher order emotional skills that sweetness requires. The good news is that physical needs are often the most straightforward to address and tend to show results relatively quickly. Regular sleep, balanced nutrition, adequate hydration, and appropriate movement create a stable foundation that supports emotional generosity. When you honor these basic needs consistently, you often find that qualities like patience, empathy, and resilience naturally become more accessible. Emotional needs and your capacity for kindness. Your emotional needs encompass your requirements for acceptance, validation, belonging, creative expression, and safe spaces to process your own feelings. When these needs are met, you naturally overflow with warmth and understanding for others. When they're chronically unmet, you may find yourself giving from a place of depletion rather than abundance, which often leads to resentment, burnout, or the kind of sweetness that feels forced rather than authentic. Many sweet-natured individuals struggle to identify their emotional needs because they've been so focused on meeting others' needs that their own emotional landscape remains unexplored territory. You might find yourself knowing immediately what would comfort a distressed friend while being completely unclear about what you need when you're distressed. The capacity for kindness flows most naturally when you feel emotionally nourished yourself. This doesn't mean you need to feel happy all the time or have all your problems solved before you can care for others. Rather, it means having regular experiences of feeling seen, heard, valued, and accepted for who you are. It means having outlets for expressing your own emotions authentically rather than always being in the role of emotional support for others. Spiritual needs and inner peace. Your spiritual needs involve your connection to purpose, meaning, transcendence, and something greater than yourself. These needs might be met through traditional religious practice, connection with nature, creative expression, service to others, or contemplative practices like meditation. When your spiritual needs are nourished, you often experience a deep inner peace that naturally radiates outward as benevolence and compassion. For many sweet souls, service to others becomes a primary spiritual practice. There's profound meaning in being a source of comfort and support for others. However, when service becomes disconnected from other sources of spiritual nourishment, it can become depleting rather than fulfilling. You might find yourself going through the motions of caring while feeling spiritually empty, or experiencing what some call compassion fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from giving without adequate spiritual replenishment. Spiritual needs often provide what we might call the inexhaustible well of compassion. When you're connected to sources of meaning that transcend immediate circumstances, you can access reserves of love and patience that don't depend on external conditions or other people's responses. This spiritual connection becomes particularly important during difficult periods when conventional sources of emotional support might be limited. Get the interconnected web. Understanding your needs across all dimensions reveals how they support and influence each other in what systems theorists call positive feedback loops. When you get adequate physical rest, you have more emotional energy available for processing feelings. When you have emotional support and validation, mental stress decreases. When your mind is clear and focused, spiritual practices become more accessible. When you feel spiritually connected, physical self-care feels like sacred practice rather than burdensome obligation. For sweet personalities, this interconnection means that small improvements in self-care often create disproportionately positive results. Because you're naturally attuned to subtle changes in your own and others' well-being, you're likely to notice quickly how addressing one area of need enhances your overall capacity for kindness and presence. Practical assessment. Understanding your unique pattern. Begin developing awareness of your individual needs by paying attention to the conditions under which your natural sweetness flows most easily and the circumstances that make it feel forced or depleted. Notice patterns. Are you more patient and empathetic after a good night's sleep? Do you feel more generous after spending time in nature? Does your capacity for listening expand after you've had a chance to express your own feelings? Keep a simple log for several days, noting your energy levels, emotional state, and capacity for kindness in relation to how well your various needs were met. You might discover that your need for physical movement is more crucial than you realize, or that you require more alone time than you've been allowing yourself, or that creative expression is essential for maintaining emotional balance. The goal isn't to become overly analytical about your needs, but to develop the same loving attentiveness to your own well-being that you naturally extend to others. Just as you've learned to read the subtle signals that indicate when someone else needs comfort, encouragement, or space, you can develop equal skill at reading your own internal signals. This self-awareness becomes the foundation for making self-care choices that truly serve rather than simply checking items off a list. When you understand your unique needs patterns, you can tailor your self-care practices to address what will most effectively restore and maintain your capacity for authentic sweetness. Crafting your personalized self-care toolkit. Creating a self-care toolkit that truly serves your sweet nature requires moving beyond generic advice to develop practices specifically calibrated to your unique needs, circumstances, and goals. Just as a master craftsperson carefully selects tools that are perfectly suited to their particular work, you'll be creating a collection of practices that effectively restore and maintain your capacity for authentic kindness and presence. The key to successful toolkit creation lies in understanding that self-care is not one size fits all. What restores and energizes one person might drain or overwhelm another. What feels nurturing to someone with an extroverted nature might feel depleting to someone who recharges through solitude. What constitutes adequate self-care during peaceful periods might be insufficient during times of high stress or major life transitions. Prerequisites for effective toolkit development. Before diving into specific practices, it's essential to cultivate the inner conditions that make sustainable self-care possible. The first prerequisite is permission. Genuine, internalized permission to prioritize your own well-being without guilt or justification. This permission often needs to be consciously granted to yourself, especially if you've been conditioned to view self-focus as selfish. The second prerequisite is curiosity rather than judgment about your needs and responses. Instead of criticizing yourself for needing rest, nourishment, or emotional support, approach these needs with the same compassionate interest you'd bring to understanding a dear friend's requirements for well-being. The third prerequisite is patience with the process. Building effective self-care habits takes time, and there will be periods of experimentation, adjustment, and refinement. The goal isn't to create a perfect system immediately, but to develop an evolving practice that grows more skillful and responsive over time. Step 1 in attuning to your authentic needs. Begin by developing what we might call inner listening, the capacity to discern what you genuinely need in any given moment rather than what you think you should need or what has worked for others. This involves paying attention to subtle internal signals that often get drowned out by external demands and expectations. Create regular check-in moments throughout your day where you pause and honestly assess your current state. Ask yourself questions like, what does my body need right now? What would help my emotions feel more balanced? What would support mental clarity? What would nourish my spirit? Listen to the answers without immediately judging them as realistic or unrealistic, appropriate or inappropriate. You might discover that you need more physical movement to release tension, more creative expression to process emotions, more intellectual stimulation to feel engaged, or more spiritual connection to feel grounded. You might find that your needs vary significantly depending on the season, your work demands, your relationships, or your current life circumstances. Pay particular attention to the times when your natural sweetness feels effortless versus when it feels forced. What conditions support your authentic warmth? What circumstances make kindness feel like work rather than natural expression? These observations provide crucial information about the self-care practices that will most effectively support your capacity for sustainable caring. Step 2, exploring potential self-care practices. With greater awareness of your needs, Begin exploring practices that might address them. Remember that effective self-care for sweet souls often looks different from conventional self-care advice. You might find that traditional relaxation techniques feel too passive when what you really need is creative expression. You might discover that solitary practices feel isolating when your deeper need is for meaningful connection. Consider practices across all four dimensions of well-being. Physical care options. These might include movement practices that release rather than create stress, nutritional approaches that stabilize rather than restrict, sleep rituals that calm rather than stimulate, and body care practices that honor rather than criticize your physical form. Emotional care options. Consider practices for emotional expression, emotional processing, emotional boundaries, and emotional nourishment. This might include journaling, creative arts, therapy, meaningful conversations, or structured emotional release practices. Mental care options. Explore practices that clear mental clutter, enhance focus, provide intellectual stimulation, or create mental rest. This might include meditation, reading, learning new skills, organizing your environment, or engaging in problem-solving activities. Spiritual care options. Consider practices that connect you to meaning, purpose, transcendence, or something greater than yourself. This might include prayer, meditation, time in nature, service to others, creative expression, or study of wisdom traditions. Step 3. Thoughtful experimentation. Approach self-care exploration with the spirit of a gentle scientist, conducting experiments with curiosity rather than pressure for immediate results. Try each practice for long enough to fairly assess its impact, usually at least a week for daily practices, a month for weekly practices. Pay attention to both immediate effects and cumulative benefits. Some practices might provide instant relief but no lasting change, while others might feel neutral initially but create significant benefits over time. Notice not just how practices affect you in isolation, but how they influence your interactions with others, your energy levels throughout the day, and your overall sense of well-being. Be particularly attentive to how different practices affect your capacity for sweetness. Does a particular practice leave you feeling more patient with difficult people? Does it enhance your ability to listen without getting overwhelmed? Does it increase your resilience during stressful periods? These observations help you identify which practices most effectively support your goals. Step 4, integration into daily life. The most carefully chosen self-care practices are useless if they remain theoretical. Successful integration requires matching practices to your actual life circumstances rather than trying to force your life to accommodate idealized practices. Look for ways to weave self-care into existing routines rather than adding entirely new obligations to an already full schedule. This might mean incorporating mindful breathing into your commute, doing gentle stretches while watching television, or turning meal preparation into a meditative practice. Consider the concept of habit stacking, attaching new self-care practices to well-established habits. For example, you might do a brief gratitude practice immediately after brushing your teeth, or take 3 conscious breaths before checking email. Identify your non-negotiables, the self-care practices that most dramatically affect your well-being and therefore deserve protected time in your schedule. These might be different during different life seasons, but having clarity about your current non-negotiables helps you make better choices about where to invest limited time and energy. Step 5. Cultivating self-compassion during implementation. Perhaps the most crucial aspect of successful self-care implementation is maintaining kindness toward yourself throughout the process. There will be days when you skip practices, weeks when you fall out of routines, and periods when self-care feels impossible due to external circumstances. Rather than using these occasions for self-criticism, treat them as opportunities to practice the same compassion you'd offer a friend facing similar challenges. Ask yourself, what does kindness look like in this situation? Sometimes kindness means gently returning to abandoned practices. Sometimes it means adjusting expectations to match current capacity. Sometimes it means recognizing that simply getting through difficult periods is sufficient. Remember that self-care is a practice, not a performance. The goal isn't perfection, but rather the development of an increasingly skillful and responsive relationship with your own well-being. Each time you notice you have drifted away from caring for yourself and choose to return with kindness rather than criticism, you're strengthening both your self-care capacity and your capacity for extending that same understanding to others. Step 6, evolution and refinement. Effective self-care evolves as you evolve. Practices that serve you beautifully during one phase of life might become inadequate or inappropriate during another phase. Rather than clinging to specific practices, cultivate flexibility and willingness to adjust your approach as your needs change. Schedule regular reviews of your self-care practices, perhaps monthly or seasonally, to assess what's working and what needs modification. Ask yourself, what practices are consistently nourishing me? What feels forced or ineffective? What new needs have emerged? How can I better support my current circumstances? This ongoing refinement process prevents self-care from becoming stagnant or routine in the negative sense. It ensures that your practices remain alive, responsive, and genuinely supportive rather than becoming just another set of obligations to fulfill. Physical self-care, nurturing your body for patient kindness. Your body is the sacred vessel through which your sweetness expresses itself in the world. When this vessel is well cared for, your natural patience, empathy, and warmth flow with ease. When it's neglected or depleted, even your most sincere efforts at kindness can feel forced and draining. Understanding the intimate connection between physical well-being and emotional generosity is crucial for anyone who wants to sustain their caring nature over time. The relationship between physical care and emotional capacity isn't merely correlation. It's causation rooted in the fundamental architecture of your nervous system. When your basic physical needs are met, your nervous system can operate from what researchers call the social engagement zone, where higher-order capacities like empathy, patience, and emotional regulation are readily accessible. When physical needs are chronically unmet, your nervous system shifts into survival mode, making these same capacities much more difficult to access. Mindful nourishment, the foundation of stable kindness. The food you consume becomes the literal substance of your body and brain, directly affecting your capacity for emotional regulation and sustained patience. Blood sugar fluctuations don't just affect your energy levels. They dramatically influence your ability to remain calm under pressure, think clearly during conflicts, and maintain warmth toward difficult people. Many sweet-natured individuals struggle with nutrition because they prioritize others' meals while grabbing whatever is convenient for themselves. Or they use food restriction as a form of self-punishment when they feel they've been too sensitive or too needy. This pattern creates a destructive cycle where poor nourishment leads to decreased emotional regulation, which leads to self-criticism, which leads to further neglect of nutritional needs. Mindful nourishment begins with recognizing that feeding yourself well is not vanity or self-indulgence, but essential infrastructure for your capacity to care for others. When you eat in ways that stabilize your blood sugar and provide sustained energy, you're literally creating the biochemical conditions that support patience, empathy, and emotional resilience. The principles of mindful nourishment are surprisingly simple. Eat regularly enough to avoid energy crashes, include protein and healthy fats to maintain steady blood sugar, consume adequate water to support brain function, and pay attention to how different foods affect your mood and energy. Notice whether you feel more patient and emotionally available after certain meals and less so after others. Beyond the mechanics of nutrition, mindful nourishment involves approaching food with the same care and attention you naturally give to other important aspects of life. This might mean taking time to prepare meals that both nourish your body and please your senses, eating without distraction so you can notice hunger and fullness cues, or expressing gratitude for the sustenance that enables your body to serve as a vehicle for love in the world. Restorative movement, releasing tension for emotional flow. Physical tension and emotional tension are intimately connected. When your body holds chronic stress in the form of tight shoulders, clenched jaw, or restricted breathing, this physical armoring interferes with your ability to remain emotionally open and responsive. Conversely, when your body feels fluid and relaxed, emotional warmth can flow more freely. For sweet souls, movement often needs to serve a dual purpose, releasing accumulated stress while avoiding the additional pressure that can come from competitive or performance-oriented exercise. The goal isn't to punish your body for perceived inadequacies or to force it into predetermined shapes, but rather to support its natural capacity for ease and vitality. Restorative movement might look like gentle yoga that focuses on releasing rather than achieving, walking in nature where you can attune to both your body's rhythm and the world around you, dancing to music that moves your soul, or simple stretching that helps you reconnect with your physical self after periods of being mentally focused on others' needs. The key is discovering forms of movement that feel like care rather than effort, that leave you feeling more connected to your body rather than more critical of it. Pay attention to how different types of movement affect your emotional state afterward. You might find that certain activities help you process difficult emotions, while others generate energy and optimism, while still others create a sense of groundedness and stability. Movement also provides an opportunity to practice the kind of self-attunement that supports good emotional boundaries. As you move, you can learn to distinguish between good effort that strengthens and harmful effort that depletes, between appropriate challenge and overwhelming demand. These same skills translate directly to emotional situations where you need to discern between helpful engagement and draining over-involvement. Rejuvenating rest. Sleep as emotional restoration. Sleep isn't merely a time when your body shuts down. It's an active process of restoration during which your brain processes emotional experiences, consolidates learning, and literally cleans out toxins that accumulate during waking hours. For people with naturally empathetic temperaments, sleep becomes even more crucial because you're processing not only your own emotional experiences, but also the residual energy you've absorbed from supporting others. The relationship between sleep quality and emotional regulation is so strong that even modest sleep deprivation can significantly reduce your capacity for patience, empathy, and stress management. When you're well rested, challenges that might normally trigger reactivity feel more manageable. When you're sleep deprived, interactions that would usually be easy can feel overwhelming. Creating conditions for rejuvenating rest often requires protecting your sleep as fiercely as you protect time for other important commitments. This might mean establishing boundaries around evening activities, creating calming bedtime rituals that help you transition from the day's caring activities to personal restoration, or addressing environmental factors that interfere with deep rest. For highly sensitive or empathetic individuals, the transition to sleep can be particularly challenging because the quiet often allows suppressed emotions or absorbed energies to surface. Developing gentle practices for processing the day's emotional accumulation, perhaps through journaling, dream, meditation, or simply conscious breathing, can help you release what isn't yours to carry and settle into restorative rest. Quality sleep also requires honoring your individual sleep needs rather than trying to conform to external expectations about how much rest you should need. Some people naturally require more sleep, especially during stressful periods or when doing emotionally demanding work. Rather than viewing this as weakness or inefficiency, recognize it as important information about what your particular nervous system needs to function optimally. Conscious embodiment. Presence as foundation for connection. Perhaps the most subtle but profound aspect of physical self-care involves developing what we might call conscious embodiment, the practice of inhabiting your body with awareness, acceptance, and appreciation rather than criticism, disconnection, or take-for-granted neglect. Many caring individuals live primarily in their heads, focused on thinking about others' needs, solving problems, or managing complex emotional dynamics. While this mental focus enables sophisticated empathy and problem solving, it can also create disconnection from the wisdom and signals of your own body. Conscious embodiment involves regularly returning your attention to your physical self with curiosity and kindness. This might be as simple as taking several conscious breaths during transitions between activities, noticing the sensation of your feet on the ground as you walk, or doing brief body scans to identify areas of tension or ease. This practice supports your capacity for sweetness in several ways. First, embodied awareness helps you recognize your own needs and limits before they become overwhelming, enabling you to address them proactively rather than reactively. Second, physical presence enhances your ability to attune to others without losing yourself in their experience. Third, embodied individuals naturally project a quality of groundedness and stability that others find calming and reassuring. The goal isn't to become self-absorbed or overly focused on physical sensations, but rather to include your body as a trusted source of information and wisdom. When you can sense tension building in your shoulders, you can address it before it becomes a headache. When you notice your breathing becoming shallow, you can consciously deepen it before anxiety escalates. When you feel your energy flagging, you can take a brief rest before pushing into depletion. Conscious embodiment also involves treating your physical form with the same respect and care you naturally extend to others. This might mean speaking to yourself kindly about your appearance, appreciating your body's capacity to carry you through your caring work, or recognizing that taking good physical care of yourself is a form of gratitude for the vessel that allows you to love others. Emotional self-care, cultivating inner landscape for empathetic connections. Your emotional well-being forms the heart of your capacity for authentic sweetness. When your inner emotional landscape is tended with care, when feelings are acknowledged, processed, and integrated rather than suppressed or ignored, your natural empathy and warmth can flow freely without depleting you. However, when emotions accumulate unprocessed, or when you consistently prioritize others' emotional needs over your own, your capacity for genuine connection gradually erodes. People with naturally sweet dispositions face unique emotional challenges. Your sensitivity, which allows you to attune so skillfully to others' feelings, can also make you more susceptible to emotional overwhelm. Your empathy, which enables you to offer meaningful support, can sometimes blur the boundaries between your emotions and others. Your desire to maintain harmony and connection might lead you to suppress or minimize your own difficult feelings rather than risk conflict or burdening others. Understanding emotional self-care means recognizing that your feelings are not optional add-ons to your experience, but crucial information that deserves attention and care. Just as physical pain alerts you to injuries that need treatment, emotional discomfort signals inner conditions that require tending. Ignoring or suppressing emotions doesn't make them disappear. It simply drives them underground, where they can create more subtle but persistent interference with your well-being and relationships. Cultivating emotional fluency, the language of inner experience. Emotional fluency, the ability to identify, understand, and articulate your feelings with precision, forms the foundation of effective emotional self-care. Many people operate with what researchers call emotional granularity, limited vocabulary for their inner experience that reduces complex feelings to simple categories like good, bad, stressed, or fine. For sweet souls, developing emotional fluency is particularly important because your natural tendency to focus on others' feelings might have left your own emotional vocabulary underdeveloped. You might be able to immediately identify when someone else is feeling discouraged versus disappointed versus overwhelmed, while being unclear about the specific nature of your own emotional states. Expanding your emotional vocabulary isn't an academic exercise. It's a practical tool that enhances your ability to respond appropriately to your own needs. When you can distinguish between feeling lonely versus feeling disconnected, between feeling overwhelmed versus feeling understimulated, between feeling awed versus feeling grieved, you can choose interventions that actually address the specific emotional condition you're experiencing. Begin developing emotional fluency by checking in with yourself several times throughout the day, asking it not just, how am I feeling? What specifically am I feeling? Use emotion wheels or lists of feeling words to help identify subtle distinctions. Notice that you might be experiencing multiple emotions simultaneously, feeling grateful for someone's friendship while also feeling frustrated with their behavior, or feeling excited about a new opportunity while also feeling anxious about the unknown. Practice articulating your emotions without immediately explaining them away or minimizing them. Instead of saying, I'm fine, just a little tired, you might say, I'm feeling emotionally saturated from absorbing so much intensity today. Instead of, I'm being too sensitive, you might say, I'm feeling hurt, and I need some time to process this interaction. Healthy emotional expression, creating safe channels for release. Once you've developed greater awareness of your emotional landscape, the next step involves creating appropriate channels for expressing and processing these feelings. Emotional expression doesn't necessarily mean sharing every feeling with every person, but rather ensuring that your emotions have adequate outlets rather than remaining trapped inside where they can create internal pressure. For sweet personalities, emotional expression can feel particularly challenging because you might worry about burdening others with your feelings or creating conflict through authentic emotional communication. You might have learned early in life that your value lay in being the person who made others feel better, not the person who needed emotional support yourself. Healthy emotional expression begins with recognizing that your feelings matter as much as others' feelings, and that expressing emotions appropriately is actually a gift to your relationships rather than a burden. When you share your authentic emotional experience, you invite others into deeper intimacy and give them the opportunity to care for you in return. When you consistently hide your emotions, you prevent genuine connection and may inadvertently teach others that you don't need or want their support. Consider developing multiple channels for emotional expression. Some feelings might be appropriate to share directly with the people involved. Others might be best processed through writing, creative expression, movement, or conversation with trusted friends or counselors. Still others might be released through physical activities like vigorous exercise or vocal expression like singing or shouting in private spaces. The key is matching the expression method to both the emotion and the situation. Anger might need physical release before it can be communicated constructively. Grief might require gentle witnessing and time before it's ready for sharing. Joy might flourish when shared immediately with others who can celebrate with you. Pay attention to what happens to emotions that don't get expressed. Do they accumulate as body tension? Do they leak out as irritability or passive-aggressive behavior? Do they turn inward as self-criticism or depression? Understanding your personal patterns helps you recognize when emotions need attention before they create more complex problems. Processing emotions without spillover. Emotional boundaries for empaths. One of the most crucial skills for sweet souls involves learning to process your own emotions fully without inadvertently dumping them onto others. This challenge is particularly acute for empathetic individuals who might absorb others' emotions throughout the day and then need to release that accumulated emotional energy without creating new emotional burdens for the people around them. Emotional spillover occurs when unprocessed emotions from one situation contaminate interactions in other situations. For example, frustration from a difficult work meeting might spill over into impatience with family members who had nothing to do with the original trigger. Or absorbed anxiety from supporting a friend through crisis might emerge as general irritability that affects everyone you encounter. Preventing emotional spillover requires developing what might be called emotional containment, the ability to hold and process emotions consciously rather than letting them spread indiscriminately. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions, but rather creating appropriate containers for experiencing and releasing them. One effective technique involves what therapists call emotional bookending, taking time before and after emotionally challenging situations to center yourself and process whatever arises. Before entering a difficult conversation, you might spend a few minutes grounding yourself and setting intentions for how you want to show up. After the conversation, you might take time to notice what emotions arose and give them appropriate attention before moving on to other activities. Another crucial skill involves learning to distinguish between emotions that are truly yours and emotions you've absorbed from others. Empathetic individuals often pick up others' emotional states automatically, sometimes without realizing it. Learning to ask, is this feeling mine or someone else's, can help you respond appropriately rather than treating absorbed emotions as if they were your own. When you recognize that you've absorbed emotional energy from others, you can consciously choose to release it rather than carrying it indefinitely. This might involve visualization practices like imagining the energy flowing back to its source, physical activities that help discharge accumulated tension, or simply reminding yourself that you don't need to hold on to emotions that aren't yours. Building emotional support networks, creating safe spaces for vulnerability. Even the most emotionally self-sufficient individuals need relationships where they can be vulnerable, receive support, and experience the nourishment that comes from being cared for rather than always being the caregiver. For sweet souls, building and maintaining these support networks often requires conscious intention because your natural tendency might be to minimize your own needs or to attract people who see you primarily as a source of support rather than someone who also needs care. Effective emotional support networks typically include different types of relationships that meet different emotional needs. You might have friends who excel at offering practical advice, others who provide empathetic listening, still others who can make you laugh when you're taking life too seriously. You might have mentors who offer wisdom and perspective, peers who understand your particular challenges, or family members who love you unconditionally. The key is ensuring that the support flows in multiple directions rather than always flowing from you to others. This requires both seeking out people who have the capacity and willingness to offer support and being vulnerable enough to actually receive care when it's offered. Many caring individuals find the receiving part particularly challenging because it requires admitting need and accepting help, which can feel uncomfortable if you're more familiar with being the helper. Building emotional support networks also involves being clear about what kinds of support you find most helpful. Some people feel supported through deep conversations about feelings, while others feel cared for through shared activities or practical help. Some prefer immediate response to emotional crises, while others need space to process before seeking input. Understanding your own support preferences helps you communicate effectively with others about how they can best care for you. Remember that professional support, therapy, counseling, or coaching can be an important component of your emotional support network, especially during challenging life transitions or when working through complex emotional patterns. Professional supporters offer trained skills and objective perspectives that friends and family, despite their best intentions, might not be able to provide. Mental self-care, clear thinking for compassionate responses. Your mental well-being profoundly influences your capacity for wise, compassionate responses to life's challenges. When your mind is clear, focused, and well-nourished, you can access the emotional intelligence and creative problem-solving abilities that make your sweetness most effective. However, when your mental resources are depleted from overload, distraction, or chronic stress, even simple interactions can feel overwhelming, and your usually wise responses might give way to reactivity or mental fog. For individuals with naturally caring dispositions, mental self-care often gets overlooked because mental energy gets unconsciously allocated to understanding others' needs, solving their problems, or managing complex emotional dynamics. While this mental generosity demonstrates admirable commitment to others' well-being, it can leave insufficient cognitive resources for your own mental health and clarity. Mental self-care isn't about becoming self-absorbed or thinking only about yourself. It's about maintaining the cognitive clarity that allows you to think wisely about everything, including how to best serve others. When your mind is well cared for, you're more likely to find creative solutions to problems, communicate effectively during conflicts, and make decisions that serve everyone's long-term well-being rather than just avoiding immediate discomfort. Mindfulness is mental foundation. Cultivating present moment clarity. Mindfulness, the practice of maintaining kind, non-judgmental attention to present moment and experience, forms the foundation of mental self-care because it provides respite from the constant mental activity that can exhaust cognitive resources. For sweet souls, mindfulness becomes particularly important because it offers relief from the mental habit of continuously monitoring others' emotional states and thinking about how to help or support them. The mental benefits of mindfulness extend far beyond stress reduction. Regular mindfulness practice literally changes the structure of your brain, strengthening areas associated with attention regulation, emotional balance, and self-awareness, while reducing reactivity in areas associated with anxiety and stress response. These changes enhance your capacity to remain mentally clear during challenging situations rather than being swept away by emotional reactivity. For caring individuals, mindfulness also provides what might be called cognitive boundaries. the ability to notice when your mind is becoming entangled in others' problems in ways that aren't actually helpful. You might find yourself ruminating about someone else's difficulties, mentally rehearsing conversations you want to have with them, or trying to solve problems that aren't yours to solve. Mindfulness helps you recognize these mental patterns and gently redirect your attention to more productive focuses. Mindfulness practice doesn't require elaborate meditation retreats or hour-long sitting sessions. It can be as simple as taking 3 conscious breaths between activities, eating a meal without distraction, or spending a few minutes focusing entirely on a single task. The key is regularity rather than duration. Frequent brief returns to present moment awareness are more beneficial than occasional long meditation sessions. As you develop mindfulness skills, you might notice that your thinking becomes less chaotic and more spacious. Instead of feeling mentally cluttered by competing demands and concerns, you develop the ability to focus on one thing at a time while holding a larger perspective. This mental clarity naturally enhances your capacity for wise, compassionate responses because you're thinking from a place of calm centeredness rather than anxious reactivity. Cognitive decluttering. Managing mental input for clarity. Just as physical clutter can make it difficult to find what you need in your environment, mental clutter, cluster, excessive information and unfinished mental tasks and overwhelming choice can make it difficult to think clearly and respond wisely to situations. For empathetic individuals who naturally absorb information about others' emotional states and needs, mental decluttering becomes essential for maintaining cognitive capacity. Mental clutter accumulates from multiple sources: information overload from news and social media, unfinished tasks that create mental open loops, decisions that have been postponed, and the mental energy required to track others' complex emotional needs. This clutter doesn't just make thinking less efficient, it can create a chronic state of mental stimulation that interferes with rest, creativity, and the deeper reflection that wise decisions require. Cognitive decluttering involves both reducing unnecessary mental input and organizing necessary information more effectively. This might mean establishing boundaries around news consumption, social media use, or exposure to others' emotional intensity. It might involve completing or delegating unfinished tasks that create mental pressure or developing systems for organizing information so it doesn't require constant mental tracking. For sweet souls, cognitive decluttering often requires examining the assumption that you need to stay mentally available to everyone's needs all the time. You might discover that constantly monitoring others' emotional states, even with loving intentions, creates mental fatigue that actually reduces your ability to help effectively when genuine support is needed. Consider implementing practices like digital Sabbaths, where you temporarily disconnect from information streams, brain dumps, where you write down everything on your mind to clear mental space, or decision batching, where you make multiple small decisions at once rather than having them linger in mental background. The goal isn't to become mentally rigid or to stop caring about others, but rather to use your mental energy more consciously so that you have adequate cognitive resources available for the thinking tasks that matter most to you. Learning and growth as mental nourishment, feeding curiosity and creativity. Your mind, like your body, requires nourishment to function optimally. Mental nourishment comes through learning new things, engaging with challenging ideas, exercising creativity, and pursuing interests that stimulate curiosity and wonder. For caring individuals, intellectual growth often gets deprioritized in favor of meeting others' immediate needs. But mental stimulation is essential for maintaining the cognitive flexibility and creative problem-solving abilities that make caring most effective. Learning and growth serve multiple functions for mental well-being. They provide positive stimulation that counters the mental fatigue that can come from dealing repeatedly with problems and difficulties. They exercise cognitive capacities like memory, attention, and reasoning that need regular use to remain sharp. They offer opportunities for the kind of mental engagement that creates what psychologists call flow states, periods of focused absorption that are both enjoyable and restorative. For sweet personalities, intellectual growth can also provide perspective that enhances emotional wisdom. When you learn about psychology and philosophy, history, or other fields that explore human nature and experience, you develop frameworks for understanding the challenges you and others face. This understanding can reduce the emotional overwhelm that sometimes comes from empathizing with others' pain without having context for making sense of it. Mental nourishment doesn't necessarily require formal education or academic study. It might involve reading books that expand your perspective, learning practical skills that challenge your mind, engaging in conversations with people who think differently than you do, or pursuing creative activities that require sustained mental focus. The key is choosing learning activities that feel genuinely interesting and engaging rather than obligatory. When learning feels forced or goal-oriented, it can become another source of mental pressure rather than mental nourishment. When learning flows from genuine curiosity and interest, it provides both intellectual stimulation and emotional satisfaction. Pay attention to what kinds of mental stimulation leave you feeling energized versus depleted. You might find that certain types of learning help you feel more creative and optimistic, while others help you feel more grounded and wise, while still others help you feel more confident and capable. Spiritual self-care, connecting with sacred purpose. Your spiritual well-being encompasses your connection to meaning, purpose, transcendence, and something greater than your individual concerns. For many people with naturally sweet dispositions, spiritual life is intrinsically connected to service and care for others. There's profound meaning in being a source of comfort, support, and love in the world. However, when service becomes disconnected from other sources of spiritual nourishment, it can become depleting rather than fulfilling, leading to what some call compassion fatigue or spiritual emptiness despite constant giving. Spiritual self-care involves nurturing your connection to the transcendent sources of meaning and purpose that provide what we might call an inexhaustible well of compassion. When you're spiritually nourished, your care for others flows from a sense of abundance rather than obligation, from art rather than duty, from love rather than guilt. This spiritual fullness doesn't make you less concerned with others' well-being. It makes your care more sustainable and ultimately more beneficial for everyone involved. The spiritual dimension of life operates by different principles than material existence. While physical and emotional resources can become depleted through use, spiritual resources often grow stronger through expression. Love shared multiplies rather than divides. Compassion offered with an open heart creates more compassion. Service flowing from spiritual fullness nourishes both giver and receiver. Contemplative practices, creating sacred space for inner connection. Contemplative practices, meditation, prayer, contemplation, and silence, create dedicated time and space for connecting with the spiritual dimension of life. These practices offer respite from the constant activity of thinking, planning, and responding to external demands, allowing deeper sources of wisdom and peace to emerge. For sweet souls, contemplative practices serve multiple functions. They provide what might be called spiritual recharging, time to connect with sources of love and wisdom that transcend immediate circumstances. They offer perspective that helps you distinguish between problems you're meant to help solve and difficulties that others need to navigate themselves. They cultivate inner peace that naturally radiates outward as presence and calm. Contemplative practices don't require adherence to any particular religious tradition or belief system. They can be as simple as sitting quietly and following your breath, as structured as formal prayer or meditation, or as informal as mindful walking in nature. The key is regularity and intention, consistently creating space for inner connection rather than waiting for spiritual inspiration to arise spontaneously. Many people find that combining different types of contemplative practice serves their spiritual needs more completely than relying on a single approach. You might benefit from both silent meditation that quiets mental activity and prayer that engages with divine relationship, or both structured practices that provide consistent framework and spontaneous spiritual moments that arise naturally. As you develop contemplative skills, you might notice that you become less reactive to others' emotional states and more responsive to their deeper needs. When you're spiritually centered, you're less likely to be swept away by emotional intensity and more likely to offer the quality of calm presence that allows others to find their own center. Nature as spiritual teacher, connecting with Earth's wisdom. The natural world offers profound spiritual nourishment for those open to receiving its teachings. Nature operates according to principles that can inform and inspire human spiritual development. Cycles of growth and rest, death and renewal, surrender and resilience. Individual uniqueness within interconnected wholeness. For caring individuals, nature connection provides particular benefits. Time in natural settings often creates automatic nervous system regulation, shifting you from the stress states that can accompany constant attention to others' needs into the calm states that support wise response. Natural environments also offer perspective on human problems, reminding you that challenges that feel overwhelming are part of larger cycles and patterns. Nature connection doesn't require wilderness retreats or extensive outdoor adventures. It might involve tending plants, watching weather patterns, observing seasonal changes, or simply sitting under trees. Urban nature, parks, gardens, even single trees or potted plants, can provide spiritual nourishment for those without access to wild spaces. Many sweet souls find that nature helps them develop trust in larger processes they cannot control or understand. Just as plants grow according to their own timing and trees weather storms through flexibility rather than resistance, you can learn to trust life's unfolding while focusing on your own growth and contribution rather than trying to control outcomes. Spending time in nature also often generates what researchers call awe, the feeling of being in the presence of something vast and beautiful that transcends ordinary understanding. These experiences of awe have been shown to increase generosity, reduce materialism, and enhance overall well-being, making them particularly valuable for people whose spiritual path centers on service to others. Service is spiritual practice, giving from fullness, rather than emptiness. When service flows from spiritual fullness rather than emotional need or obligation, it becomes a profound spiritual practice that nourishes both giver and receiver. This kind of service doesn't deplete because it connects you with sources of meaning and purpose that transcend individual concerns. The key distinction lies in the motivation and inner state from which service arises. Service flowing from spiritual practice tends to be less attached to specific outcomes, more patient with others' pace of growth, and more accepting of your own limitations. It's motivated by love and gratitude rather than guilt or the need to be needed. Service as spiritual practice also includes discernment about when to help and when to step back, when to offer support and when to allow others to develop their own strength. This discernment requires spiritual maturity, the wisdom to distinguish between helpful intervention and enabling, between appropriate concern and anxious interference. For many sweet souls, learning to serve from spiritual fullness requires examining unconscious motivations for helping others. Sometimes caring behavior is motivated by genuine love and spiritual connection. Sometimes it's motivated by the need to feel valuable, the fear of others' disapproval, or the discomfort with others' pain. Spiritual practice helps you distinguish between these different motivations and gradually align your service with love rather than need. When I've started a community, finding spiritual fellowship and shared meaning. Spiritual growth often flourishes in the context of community, relationships with others who share similar values, practices, or quest for meaning. For caring individuals, spiritual community provides both support for your own growth and opportunities to express your natural gifts in contexts where they're appreciated and reciprocated. Spiritual community doesn't necessarily require formal religious affiliation. It might involve meditation groups, book clubs focused on wisdom literature, volunteer organizations aligned with your values, or informal gatherings of people committed to personal growth and service. The key is finding others who understand and support your spiritual aspirations rather than taking them for granted or viewing them as unnecessary. In healthy spiritual communities, care flows in multiple directions rather than always flowing toward those in crisis. Members support each other's growth, celebrate each other's insights, and share the responsibilities of maintaining community well-being. This reciprocal care provides sweet souls with the experience of receiving spiritual nourishment rather than always being the source of it. Spiritual community also offers accountability and encouragement for maintaining practices during difficult periods when spiritual disciplines might feel less important than immediate demands. Fellow travelers on the spiritual path can remind you of larger purposes when you become overwhelmed by daily concerns and can offer perspective when challenges feel insurmountable. Sustaining your self-care practice. Creating effective self-care practices is only the beginning. Sustaining them over time requires understanding and addressing the internal and external obstacles that can derail even the most well-intentioned efforts. For sweet souls, these obstacles often involve deeply ingrained patterns of prioritizing others' needs over their own, cultural messages that equate self-care with selfishness, and practical challenges related to time, energy, and competing demands. The sustainability of self-care practice depends largely on how well it's integrated into your existing life, rather than existing as an additional burden or obligation. Sustainable self-care becomes woven into the fabric of daily life, rather than being a separate set of activities you need to accomplish. It flows from genuine self-compassion, rather than external pressure or self-improvement goals. Understanding sustainability also requires recognizing that self-care needs and practices naturally evolve as your life circumstances change. Practices that serve you beautifully during peaceful periods might be insufficient during times of high stress or major transitions. Flexibility and willingness to adapt your approach becomes as important as consistency in maintaining some form of self-care practice. Overcoming time scarcity, reframing priorities, and creating sacred boundaries. The perception of time scarcity, feeling like there's never enough time for adequate self-care, is perhaps the most common obstacle sweet souls face in maintaining their well-being practices. This perception often stems from the unconscious belief that others' needs should take priority over your own, leading to schedules that accommodate everyone else's requirements while leaving no protected time for self-nourishment. True time scarcity does exist in some life circumstances, but perceived time scarcity often results from difficulty saying no to requests, inability to delegate responsibilities, or perfectionism that makes tasks take longer than necessary. Addressing time scarcity therefore requires both practical time management and skills and internal work around priorities and boundaries. Begin by examining how you currently spend your time with curious observation rather than immediate judgment. Track your activities for several days, noting not just what you do, but how each activity affects your energy and well-being. You might discover that certain activities that feel obligatory actually provide minimal value to yourself or others, while other activities that seem selfish significantly enhance your capacity for everything else. Consider implementing time blocking for self-care activities, treating them with the same respect you'd give to important appointments with others. This might mean scheduling specific times for physical movement, emotional processing, spiritual practice, or mental rest, and protecting these times as fiercely as you'd protect commitments to other people. Remember that self-care often saves time in the long run by preventing the more time-consuming problems that arise from depletion, illness, relationship conflicts, mental fog, and emotional overwhelm. Spending time on self-care isn't time stolen from other important activities. It's an investment that enhances your effectiveness in all areas of life. Addressing guilt and selfishness fears, reframing self-care as sacred responsibility. For many sweet souls, the practical aspects of self-care feel manageable, but the emotional aspects, guilt, shame, and fear of being selfish, create internal resistance that sabotages even the best-intentioned efforts. These feelings often stem from early messages about the value of self-sacrifice and may be reinforced by cultural or religious teachings that emphasize serving others as the highest good. Addressing these emotional obstacles requires both compassionate understanding of their origins and gentle challenging of their accuracy. The guilt you feel about caring for yourself likely developed as a protective mechanism. Perhaps you learned early that your worth depended on how much you gave to others, or that expressing your own needs led to rejection or criticism. Reframing self-care as sacred responsibility, rather than selfish indulgence, can help shift these internal narratives. When you care for yourself, you're stewarding the resources that allow you to care for others. When you maintain your well-being, you're ensuring that your service flows from love rather than depletion. When you model healthy self-care, you give others permission to do the same. Consider the metaphor of the oxygen mask. Airlines instruct passengers to put on their own oxygen mask before helping others, not because their needs matter more, but because they cannot effectively help anyone if they're unconscious from lack of oxygen. Self-care operates on the same principle. It's not about loving yourself more than others, but about maintaining the capacity to love effectively. You might also examine whether your resistance to self-care actually serves others as much as you think it does. When you're depleted, stressed, or emotionally overwhelmed, the care you offer others is likely to be less patient, less creative, and less genuinely helpful than when you're well-resourced and centered.